Some people spend an entire lifetime searching for the moment that quietly changes everything, never realizing it can happen in the few seconds before an elevator door closes. A gentle spring rain covered downtown Chicago in a silver haze as people hurried beneath umbrellas toward the towering Grand Meridian Hotel, where executives, investors, and international guests filled the marble lobby from the earliest hours of the morning. Conversations echoed beneath crystal chandeliers while polished floors reflected the soft golden light pouring through towering glass walls. Employees moved quickly between reception desks, conference halls, and guest elevators, each carrying the quiet urgency of another busy day. Among them was Jasmine Carter, a 27-year-old black maid whose work often began long before most guests had finished breakfast. Wearing a perfectly pressed charcoal housekeeping uniform with a neatly pinned name badge, she balanced a cart filled with fresh linens, folded towels, and carefully organized guest supplies as she moved through the elegant corridors with a quiet confidence. She greeted everyone she passed with a warm smile, whether they noticed her or not. To Yasmin, kindness was never reserved for important people. It belonged to everyone. That particular morning had already begun with unexpected delays. A family staying on the 23rd floor needed extra blankets after an overnight flight. A housekeeping supervisor requested immediate assistance preparing a luxury suite for an early arrival, and an elderly guest accidentally dropped his medication beside the lobby entrance. Yasmin stopped without hesitation, helped gather every bottle, waited until the gentleman felt steady on his feet, wished him a pleasant morning, and then glanced nervously at the clock mounted above the reception desk. She was almost late delivering supplies before an important corporate event began. Holding the handle of the supply cart with one hand and carefully carrying neatly folded towels with the other, she hurried across the expansive lobby just as the elevator doors began sliding closed. "Please wait," she called politely, trying not to raise her voice too loudly. Inside the elevator stood Ethan Brooks, a 43-year-old white Korean Mafia boss whose reputation for absolute discipline and emotional distance had become legendary among the small circle of influential people who knew him. Wearing a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit with a crisp white shirt and dark silk tie, he rarely noticed strangers, rarely changed his schedule, and almost never interrupted his carefully controlled routine. His assistants had learned that every meeting began exactly on time because Ethan believed respect began with discipline. Yet as the elevator doors quietly moved together, he heard Jasmine's voice. Without thinking, his hand reached toward the illuminated control panel and pressed the open button. The doors slowly separated once again. Yasmin stepped inside, slightly out of breath but smiling with genuine gratitude. "Thank you so much," she said warmly, carefully moving her cart into position without disturbing anyone else. "You just saved my morning." Ethan gave a small nod, saying nothing. The elevator began its smooth ascent through the hotel, accompanied only by the soft instrumental music drifting from hidden speakers overhead. Yasmin adjusted a stack of towels that had shifted during her hurried walk, quietly apologizing when one nearly slipped from the cart. Ethan watched her for only a brief moment before looking forward again, yet something felt unexpectedly different. She had not recognized him. She had not stared at his expensive watch, his tailored suit, or the discreet security personnel waiting outside moments earlier. She had simply thanked a stranger for holding an elevator door. As the floors slowly illuminated above the entrance, Ethan found himself noticing details he normally ignored. The quiet sincerity in her voice. The effortless kindness in her smile. The calm way she treated every person around her with equal respect. When the elevator reached Jasmine's floor, she gently pulled her cart toward the opening doors before turning back one last time. "I hope you have a wonderful day," she said with the same genuine warmth she offered everyone she met. Then she disappeared into the hallway, leaving. The doors to close once again. Ethan remained standing in complete silence as the elevator continued climbing higher, unaware that for the first time in many years, someone he did not even know had quietly interrupted the carefully ordered life he believed nothing could ever change. Jasmine disappeared into the quiet corridor without looking back, her housekeeping cart rolling gently across the thick carpet until the sound gradually faded into the morning bustle of the hotel. Ethan remained standing inside the elevator as the doors closed once again, watching the empty space where she had stood only seconds before. Normally he spent every ride reviewing schedules, preparing for negotiations, or answering brief updates from trusted associates. That morning he did none of those things. Instead, he replayed a simple sentence in his mind. I hope you have a wonderful day. The words were ordinary, yet they lingered with unusual clarity. No one in his professional world spoke that way without expecting something in return. Respect was often measured through influence, loyalty was constantly tested, and every conversation seemed to carry an invisible purpose. Yasmin had asked for nothing. She had offered genuine kindness to a stranger she believed she would never meet again. When the elevator reached the executive conference floor, Ethan stepped into an elegant hallway lined with modern artwork and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. Senior executives immediately greeted him with practiced professionalism. A long conference table waited inside a private meeting room where financial reports, architectural plans, and investment proposals had already been arranged with perfect precision. Ethan took his usual seat at the head of the table while the meeting began exactly on schedule. Company representatives presented detailed forecasts, market analyses, and expansion strategies, yet something unusual happened. For the first time in years, Ethan lost his concentration. As one executive explained projected revenue figures, Ethan found himself remembering the expression on Jasmine's face when the elevator doors reopened. It had not been surprise. Alone. It had been sincere appreciation. He quietly turned a page in the report without realizing he had not heard the previous several minutes of discussion. One of his senior advisors noticed the distraction immediately because it had never happened before. During a short break, the advisor approached respectfully and asked whether everything was all right. Ethan answered with a calm nod, insisting he was simply thinking about another matter. Even he struggled to understand why a brief encounter had unsettled the disciplined routine he had spent decades building. Meanwhile, several floors below, Jasmine continued her work without giving the elevator another thought. She carefully prepared luxury suites before arriving guests checked in, replaced fresh flowers in elegant sitting rooms, folded linens with practiced precision, and quietly greeted co-workers passing through the hallways. She smiled warmly at a young bell attendant beginning his first week on the job and helped another housekeeper finish preparing a family suite after noticing the woman had fallen behind schedule. She treated every task with the same quiet care because she believed excellence was measured by effort rather than recognition. Shortly before noon, Ethan stood alone beside the wide conference room windows overlooking the busy streets below. Thousands of people moved through the city with destinations known only to themselves. He had spent years believing emotions complicated clear judgment, yet one unexpected meeting had created a question he could not easily dismiss. Who was the young woman who smiled so naturally without knowing anything about the man standing beside her? As the meeting resumed, Ethan closed the folder before him and made an unusual decision. Instead of leaving immediately after the final presentation, he quietly adjusted the remainder of his schedule, telling his assistants there was no need to rush. None of them understood why. Ethan did not fully understand it himself. He only knew that somewhere inside the same hotel, a young woman who had unknowingly changed the rhythm of his thoughts was continuing her ordinary day, completely unaware that a man who had never allowed anyone to enter his carefully guarded heart had begun hoping fate might allow their paths to cross once again. Jasmine never realized how many lives quietly intersected with hers each day because she never measured people by their titles. To her, every guest deserved the same courtesy, every co-worker deserved encouragement, and every ordinary moment carried an opportunity to make someone else's burden a little lighter. After completing the final room on the 23rd floor, she carefully organized fresh towels on her cart before stopping outside another suite where an elderly couple struggled with a heavy suitcase. Without being asked, she gently placed the cart against the wall and helped them carry their luggage inside. The grateful husband smiled warmly and thanked her for treating them like family instead of customers. Yasmin simply wished them a wonderful anniversary after noticing the celebration card resting beside a bouquet of white roses. She continued down the hallway without waiting for additional praise because kindness had become a habit rather than a performance. During her lunch break she chose a quiet employee lounge overlooking the city instead of the crowded cafeteria. She unpacked a simple homemade meal prepared the night before and spent several minutes answering a video call from her mother, who lived in a modest neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. Her mother asked about work, reminded her not to skip meals during busy shifts, and laughed gently when Jasmine admitted she had nearly missed an elevator that morning because she stopped to help another guest. Neither of them imagined that such a small moment would soon change everything. After work ended that evening, Jasmine stopped at a neighborhood grocery store before taking a city bus home. She greeted the cashier by name, helped a young mother reach an item from the top shelf, and smiled at a little girl who proudly showed everyone the library book she had borrowed that afternoon. Nothing about Jasmine's evening appeared extraordinary, yet every small interaction left people feeling slightly happier than before. She rented a modest apartment filled with potted plants, well-loved books, family photographs, and handwritten notes she had collected over the years from grateful hotel guests. Before going to bed she opened a small notebook where she wrote one positive memory from every day. That evening she wrote only a single sentence. A stranger held the elevator, and somehow the whole morning felt brighter. She closed the notebook with a peaceful smile, never expecting to see the man again. Across the city, Ethan sat alone inside his penthouse office surrounded by panoramic windows overlooking thousands of glowing lights stretching toward the horizon. His assistants had already gone home, leaving only the quiet hum of the city below. Important documents remained untouched on his desk while his thoughts wandered back to the hotel. He could still remember the effortless warmth in Jasmine's voice and the sincerity in her expression. She had thanked him with the same kindness she offered everyone else, never pausing to wonder who he was or why people around him behaved with such careful respect. For a man whose life had been shaped by caution, influence, and carefully guarded distance, that simple honesty felt strangely unfamiliar. Ethan stood beside the window long after midnight, watching the reflections shimmer across the glass until one quiet realization settled into his heart. He did not remember the names of the executives he had met that morning, yet he remembered every word spoken by the young woman carrying folded towels through a hotel corridor. Somewhere in the same city, Jasmine peacefully fell asleep believing she had experienced nothing more than another ordinary day, completely unaware that destiny had already begun arranging another meeting neither of them could possibly predict. The following morning arrived with the clear blue sky stretching above downtown Chicago, washing the glass walls of the Grand Meridian Hotel with warm sunlight that reflected across polished marble floors. Yasmin began another shift exactly as she always did, greeting co-workers with a quiet kindness before collecting her housekeeping cart and reviewing the list of rooms waiting to be prepared. She never imagined that someone else had also adjusted his schedule that morning, hoping for nothing more than another chance encounter. Ethan arrived at the hotel nearly an hour earlier than necessary. His assistants quietly exchanged puzzled glances because he had never voluntarily extended a business trip without a practical reason. When they suggested using a private executive entrance to reach the conference suites more efficiently, Ethan calmly declined and chose to walk through the main lobby instead. He did not fully understand why his footsteps naturally carried him toward the same bank of elevators where an ordinary moment had unexpectedly remained in his thoughts since the previous day. Guests moved through the spacious lobby carrying luggage, business portfolios, and coffee cups while hotel employees greeted arriving visitors with practiced professionalism. Ethan stood waiting before the elevator doors, appearing as composed as always, yet inwardly wondering whether fate truly offered second chances. Several moments passed before he heard the familiar sound of rolling wheels approaching across the marble floor. Yasmin appeared from the opposite corridor, carefully guiding her housekeeping cart while balancing a small vase of fresh white lilies that needed to be delivered to one of the luxury suites. She noticed Ethan almost immediately and smiled with the same effortless warmth she had offered before. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "It looks like you are having better luck with elevators today than I am." Ethan found himself smiling ever so slightly, surprising even himself. "Good morning," he replied. "You made it before the doors closed this time." Yasmin laughed softly. "That is because I started running a little earlier." Neither of them noticed several executives watching from across the lobby, confused by the unusual sight of Ethan Brooks casually speaking with a hotel employee. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside together. This time there was no hurried breathing, no rushing footsteps, only the gentle hum of the elevator beginning its smooth ascent. Yasmin carefully placed the vase against the corner of her cart before glancing toward Ethan. "Are you here for another conference?" she asked naturally. Ethan nodded. "Yes. It seems I spend more time in meeting rooms than anywhere else." Yasmin tilted her head thoughtfully. "That sounds exhausting." Ethan almost laughed because no one had ever described his carefully structured life with such simple honesty. "Sometimes it is," he admitted. "What about you? Do you always seem this busy?" Yasmin smiled. "Hotels never really slow down. There is always another guest arriving, another family celebrating something special, or someone who simply needs a little help." Her answer carried no complaint, only quiet gratitude. For a brief moment neither of them spoke. The elevator continued climbing while soft instrumental music filled the comfortable silence. Ethan realized he felt unusually at peace simply standing beside someone who expected nothing from him. When the elevator suddenly slowed between floors for a brief scheduled systems check, the lights remained steady, and a gentle announcement assured passengers that service would resume within a few minutes. Yasmin looked around calmly and smiled. "I guess life wanted to give us a little more time to talk." Ethan turned toward her, sensing that the unexpected pause inside the quiet elevator might become the beginning of a conversation neither of them had ever expected to have. The gentle announcement inside the elevator ended with a reassuring chime, leaving behind a peaceful silence broken only by the soft music drifting through hidden speakers. Yasmin rested one hand lightly on the handle of her housekeeping cart while Ethan stood beside her, unexpectedly grateful for the few extra minutes neither of them had planned. For someone whose days were measured in tightly scheduled meetings and carefully managed conversations, the unexpected pause felt strangely refreshing. Yasmin glanced toward the glowing floor indicator before smiling. "It is funny," she said. "Most people become impatient when life makes them wait for a few minutes. Sometimes those little pauses become the nicest part of the day." Ethan looked at her thoughtfully. "You always seem to find something positive." Yasmin laughed softly. "Not always. I just try. My mother used to tell me that difficult moments do not always arrive to slow us down. Sometimes they arrive so we notice something we would have rushed past." Ethan lowered his eyes for a brief moment. No executive had ever spoken to him that way. No business advisor had ever described success through simple moments instead of numbers. He found himself asking a question that surprised even him. "And what makes you happiest?" Yasmin answered almost immediately. "Knowing I made someone's day a little easier." She pointed toward the fresh white lilies resting carefully beside her cart. "Sometimes it is preparing a room perfectly for a couple celebrating their anniversary. Sometimes it is helping an older guest carry a suitcase. Sometimes it is just remembering someone's name. Those little things matter more than people realize." Ethan listened quietly. He had spent years surrounded by extraordinary wealth and influence, yet he could not remember the last time someone had spoken with such uncomplicated sincerity. The elevator remained still for another moment before Jasmine smiled at him again. "What about you?" she asked gently. "What makes you happy?" Ethan hesitated. No one had asked him that question in years without expecting a rehearsed answer. He looked toward the polished elevator doors where their reflections stood side by side. "I honestly do not know anymore," he admitted quietly. "I became so focused on responsibilities that I stopped asking myself that question." Yasmin nodded with understanding instead of surprise. "Then maybe today is a good day to start asking again." Her answer carried no judgment, only encouragement. Ethan felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through the quiet space between them. It was not excitement or admiration. It was comfort, something he had almost forgotten existed. At that moment the elevator resumed its smooth ascent. The gentle motion returned as the floor numbers continued climbing toward their destinations. Neither of them seemed eager for the ride to end. When the doors finally opened, Jasmine carefully guided her cart forward before turning toward Ethan once more. "I hope your meetings go better than you expect," she said with the same genuine smile that had remained unchanged since the first morning they met. Ethan smiled naturally, without calculation or restraint. "And I hope everyone you helped today realizes how fortunate they are." Yasmin thanked him with a quiet nod before disappearing into the elegant hallway lined with the soft lighting and fresh flowers. Ethan remained standing inside the elevator for another brief moment after the doors closed, realizing something remarkable had happened. For the first time in many years, someone had not been impressed by his reputation, curious about his success, or influenced by his position. Yasmin had simply spoken to him as though he were an ordinary man searching for happiness like everyone else, and somehow that simple conversation had reached a place inside his heart that years of power, achievement, and carefully guarded distance had never been able to touch. The conversation inside the elevator lingered in Ethan's mind long after the doors had closed behind Jasmine. Throughout the remainder of the afternoon, every meeting seemed quieter than usual, every polished presentation less important than the simple honesty he had encountered in those few unexpected minutes. His assistants noticed subtle changes almost immediately. Ethan no longer rushed from one appointment to the next. Instead, he paused to thank hotel employees who held open doors, acknowledged reception staff with polite greetings, and even slowed his pace enough to admire the fresh floral arrangements decorating the lobby. None of these gestures were dramatic, yet for a man whose life had always been governed by efficiency and emotional distance, they represented something entirely new. That evening, after the final conference concluded, Ethan declined an invitation to an exclusive dinner with several influential executives. He preferred a quiet walk through the hotel instead. As he crossed the elegant lobby, he noticed Jasmine kneeling beside a little boy whose favorite toy had slipped beneath a decorative bench. The child looked worried, but Jasmine smiled patiently as she reached underneath the furniture and carefully retrieved the small stuffed bear. The little boy hugged the toy tightly before wrapping his free arm around Jasmine in a grateful embrace. His parents thanked her sincerely, and Jasmine simply wished their family a wonderful evening before continuing toward the service hallway as though nothing remarkable had happened. Ethan watched from a respectful distance. No cameras recorded the moment. No supervisors stood nearby to evaluate her performance. She acted with the same kindness whether anyone noticed or not. That realization stayed with him long after she disappeared around the corner the following morning. Ethan postponed his departure from Chicago by another day, surprising everyone who worked with him. When one trusted advisor quietly asked whether another business opportunity had appeared, Ethan answered with a thoughtful smile. "Perhaps I have discovered something more valuable than another contract." The advisor did not ask another question. Later that afternoon, Ethan found himself returning to the lobby coffee shop overlooking the elevators. He ordered a simple cup of black coffee instead of requesting the private executive lounge reserved for distinguished guests. From his seat beside the window, he watched ordinary life unfold around him. Travelers greeted loved ones after long flights. Hotel employees welcomed arriving families. Children laughed as revolving doors spun behind them. For years Ethan had passed through places like this without truly seeing them. Now every ordinary interaction seemed filled with a quiet meaning. A familiar voice soon reached him. Yasmin entered the cafe carrying a small paper bag and politely asked whether the empty chair across from him was available while she waited for her coworker. Ethan looked up and smiled naturally. Of course. She thanked him before sitting down, completely unaware that most people considered it almost impossible to meet Ethan Brooks without carefully preparing every word they intended to say. Instead, Jasmine simply asked whether he had managed to survive another day of meetings. Ethan laughed softly, surprising himself once again. "Barely," he admitted. Yasmin smiled with genuine amusement. "Then I think you earned a peaceful cup of coffee." As warm afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating floating dust particles like tiny pieces of gold, Ethan realized he was no longer hoping for another accidental meeting. For the first time in his life, he was quietly hoping to know the person behind the smile, and somewhere deep inside a heart that had remained carefully guarded for decades, walls built from solitude were beginning to disappear one gentle conversation at a time. The quiet conversation over coffee became the beginning of something neither Ethan nor Jasmine tried to define too quickly. They simply continued crossing paths whenever life naturally allowed it. Sometimes they met in the hotel lobby before sunrise. Other days they exchanged only a brief greeting while Jasmine hurried toward another guest room and Ethan prepared for another series of meetings. Yet every encounter left both of them carrying a little more warmth than before. Several days later, Ethan arranged to remain in Chicago for one final afternoon before returning home. His assistants assumed another business negotiation had been added to his calendar, but instead Ethan asked whether the hotel restaurant accepted walk-in guests during the quieter hours between lunch and dinner. After receiving a polite confirmation, he waited near the lobby until Jasmine completed her afternoon responsibilities. When she appeared pushing her now nearly empty housekeeping cart, Ethan approached with the same calm respect she had always shown him. "Would you have time for a cup of tea after your shift?" he asked gently. Yasmin looked pleasantly surprised before smiling. "I think I would like that." There was no grand invitation, no expensive gesture, and no attempt to impress her. It was simply two people choosing to spend another hour talking. Later that afternoon they sat beside large windows overlooking the Chicago River as sunlight reflected across the water. Yasmin ordered hot chamomile tea while Ethan chose black coffee once again. Their conversation wandered naturally from favorite books to childhood memories, from family traditions to simple dreams they had never shared with many people. Yasmin spoke fondly about her mother, who believed the richest person in any room was the one who left others feeling valued. Ethan listened quietly before admitting that his own life had often been measured by irresponsibility rather than happiness. He confessed that people usually approached him because of his influence, not because they genuinely wanted to know him. Yasmin never interrupted. She simply listened with a quiet understanding. When he finished speaking, she offered a gentle smile. "You cannot change how everyone sees you," she said softly. "But you can always choose how you see yourself and how you treat the next person you meet." Her words settled into Ethan's heart with remarkable clarity. They felt honest rather than dramatic, thoughtful rather than rehearsed. As evening approached, they walked slowly through a nearby riverside park where spring flowers had begun blooming beneath rows of young trees. Families laughed together, cyclists passed along the waterfront trail, and musicians filled the air with gentle melodies. Ethan realized he had not enjoyed an ordinary afternoon in many years. He had forgotten how peaceful life could feel without schedules controlling every minute. Before they returned to the hotel entrance, Ethan stopped beneath the soft glow of the streetlights and looked at Jasmine with a complete sincerity. "Meeting you has changed something inside me," he admitted. "For the first time in a very long time, I find myself looking forward to tomorrow instead of simply planning it." Jasmine's eyes reflected quiet emotion as she answered with her usual warmth. "Sometimes the best changes happen so gradually that we only notice them after our hearts have already begun healing." They stood together for another peaceful moment before walking back toward the hotel, neither of them rushing the silence between their words because they both understood that the strongest connections were never built through grand promises, but through small moments of honesty repeated one day at a time. Jasmine never asked Ethan about the parts of his life he chose to keep private, and that quiet respect became one of the reasons he trusted her more with each passing day. She understood that every person carried chapters they were not yet ready to read aloud. Instead of asking difficult questions, she paid attention to the person standing in front of her. Over the following weeks, Ethan found himself returning to Chicago whenever his schedule allowed. His assistants quietly noticed that the city had become his preferred destination, although no one understood the real reason. Business meetings continued, but they were no longer the center of every trip. Whenever time permitted, Ethan and Jasmine met for simple walks through nearby parks, shared coffee in the quiet hotel cafe, or talked for a few peaceful minutes before Jasmine began another busy shift. Nothing about their growing friendship felt rushed. It developed naturally, built upon countless ordinary conversations that slowly revealed extraordinary character. Yasmin spoke about believing every person deserved to be treated with dignity regardless of appearance, profession, or social position. Ethan admitted that for many years he had become so accustomed to people approaching him because of influence or reputation that genuine sincerity had begun to feel almost impossible to recognize. Yasmin smiled gently and reminded him that kindness usually appeared in the smallest moments because it never needed an audience. Her words stayed with him long after each conversation ended. One afternoon, Ethan quietly observed Jasmine from across the hotel lobby as she comforted a young employee who had accidentally broken an expensive decorative vase. The frightened young woman expected criticism, but Jasmine calmly helped collect the scattered pieces, assured her that mistakes did not define good people, and even stayed beside her while they explained the accident to the supervisor. Instead of blame, the supervisor appreciated their honesty and thanked them both for handling the situation responsibly. Watching from a respectful distance, Ethan realized that Jasmine possessed a rare gift. She never changed who she was depending on who happened to be watching. Her compassion remained exactly the same in every circumstance. Later that evening, as they walked slowly beside the Chicago River beneath a sky painted with soft shades of orange and gold, Ethan finally shared something he had never admitted aloud. "Before I met you," he said quietly, "I believed strength meant never allowing anyone close enough to change me." Yasmin looked toward the shimmering reflections dancing across the water before answering. "Real strength is trusting someone enough to become a better version of yourself." Ethan stopped walking for a moment, absorbing every word. He realized that nothing Jasmine had ever said attempted to impress him. Every conversation simply reflected the way she already lived. He turned toward her with a complete honesty. "I do not want to hide behind titles anymore when I am with you. I want you to know me as the man I am becoming, not only the man I have been." Jasmine's warm smile carried quiet understanding instead of surprise. "Then let us keep getting to know each other one honest conversation at a time." As the evening breeze gently moved through the riverside trees and the lights of Chicago gradually illuminated the skyline, both of them understood that what had begun with a single elevator door had quietly become something far more meaningful than either heart had expected, and neither of them felt any desire to turn back from the peaceful path they were now choosing together. Nearly 1 year passed before Ethan returned to the Grand Meridian Hotel on the same spring morning when everything had quietly begun. The city awakened beneath gentle sunshine instead of rain, yet the familiar lobby remained filled with the same comforting rhythm of travelers arriving, employees greeting guests, and elevators carrying countless ordinary stories from one floor to another. Ethan walked through the entrance alone, dressed in the same understated charcoal suit he had worn on the morning that changed his life, but there was something unmistakably different about him now. His expression carried a quiet peace that no business success had ever given him. His assistants often remarked that he smiled more, listened longer, and measured success by the people around him rather than the numbers inside financial reports. They never knew the true reason for that transformation. Yasmin was arranging fresh flowers beside the reception area when she noticed him approaching. Her smile appeared exactly as it had on the first day, sincere, warm, and completely unchanged by time. She walked toward him with calm confidence, and neither of them needed dramatic words because the most important conversations between them had always been spoken through honesty instead of performance. Ethan looked around the elegant lobby before smiling gently. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Yasmin laughed softly. "You mean the morning I almost missed the elevator?" Ethan nodded. "I thought I was holding the door for a stranger. I never imagined I was opening a completely different future." Jasmine's eyes reflected quiet gratitude. Sometimes life hides its greatest gifts inside ordinary moments. Together they walked toward the same elevator, now polished exactly as it had been months before. Guests stepped aside politely while hotel employees continued their work, unaware that the simple scene before them represented a journey that had quietly reshaped two lives. Ethan pressed the familiar open button, but this time he turned toward Jasmine before either of them stepped inside. "There is something I have wanted to tell you for a long time," he said gently. "You never tried to change me. You simply showed me that kindness could exist without conditions, and because of that, I found the courage to become someone I had forgotten was possible. Yasmin smiled with the tears of quiet happiness shining in her eyes. You changed because you chose to. He only reminded you that your heart was always capable of more than you believed. Ethan reached for her hand with calm respect, giving her every opportunity to step away if she wished. Instead, Jasmine placed her hand in his with complete confidence. Together they entered the elevator that had first brought them together, and as the doors slowly closed, neither of them felt the need to rush toward the future. They had already discovered that the most meaningful destinations were never reached through speed but through patience, trust, and countless ordinary moments shared with extraordinary sincerity. As the elevator rose quietly through the hotel, Chicago stretched beyond the glass walls beneath a brilliant blue sky, reminding them that every new beginning often looks surprisingly ordinary when it first arrives. And on that peaceful morning, two people from completely different worlds proved that the strongest love is never built by power, wealth, or reputation. It is built by respect freely given, kindness consistently lived, and the courage to hold an elevator door for someone who may quietly change your life forever.